Good afternoon, and welcome, fellow Googlers, and to all those who are watching this on YouTube. I'm Alan Davidson, head of U.S. Public Policy for Google, based in Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us today. Tip O'Neill famously said that all politics is local, and so we really could think of nobody better to kick off Google's policy speaker series for 2008, this exciting election year, than our own local Congresswoman, Anna Eshoo. Representative Congresswoman Eshoo has been involved in politics and public service here in Northern California for many years. She's been representing the 14th District of California, our district, I guess since 1993, over 15 years. She's been a congressional leader on many high-tech and internet policy issues, and she's also emerged as a national leader on other issues that many people at Google care deeply about, that we should all care deeply about, like children's health and green energy issues. Early on, I think, and I've watched, as somebody who's been involved in the internet policy space for a while, I've watched Congresswoman Eshoo, and she has been a real leader and one of the what I would call most clueful, and that's a term of high praise here at Google, one of the more clueful members of Congress about the issues that face the internet. I think early on she really recognized the power and potential of the internet, and she's been a leader on issues. Whether it was early on encryption policy, on issues about regulating the internet and keeping it open and free. More recently, she really led the charge in the last Congress on net neutrality legislation. She's been wonderful on patent reform and a whole host of other issues that are incredibly important to the whole high-tech and internet industry, and to Google in particular. I'll share one small story. We in 2006 we were in the middle of a very pitched battle, as it were, a real fight about net neutrality, and Congresswoman Eshoo was really one of the people who really led that charge for us in the House of Representatives. But there was a very contentious markup, it's called. It's when a committee votes on a bill. And there was a markup in her committee, the House Telecommunications Subcommittee of the House Commerce Committee, on telecommunications legislation, and particularly on this net neutrality bill. And at the 11th hour, kind of out of nowhere, another member of Congress who will remain nameless and who was really opposed to net neutrality and to openness on the internet, introduced what some people called the Google Killer Amendment. It was an amendment to that would have, hard to describe it, it would have really heavily regulated search engines in particular, and us in particular. And it happened sort of in the middle of this scrum in this subcommittee here markup. And it was Congresswoman Eshoo, along with Representative Ed Markey, who really immediately understood the problems with this legislation, this language, and leapt into the fray and actually persuaded her colleagues. This was a committee that was at the time, dominated by members of the other party, and persuaded her colleagues not to vote on this. What would have been a very bad piece of legislation for us, and it's that kind of understanding for which we're very grateful to have her, both as a representative of our district and us as a company, and also as somebody who's out there fighting for freedom and openness on the internet. So. We're honored to have her here with us today. She will be joined in a fireside chat by our own CEO, Eric Schmidt. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Anna Eshoo. Thank you. Thank you. It's great to have you.
You can sit here. You can sit
over here.
I have wanted Congresswoman Eshoo to come here for a long time, because she is almost the perfect example of a congressperson. She understands technology. She understands what we need. She understands politics. She's long-term committed to the success of the country. And I think it'd be interesting to explore with you a little bit about how the world has changed so much in your now 17 or so years in Congress.
50, Eric.
50.
I don't want you to think I've been around for a long time.
I first met Anna at the Democratic Convention in 1996, where I was at Sun and we were carrying around, we were doing a little radio show for the internet. internet radio was just being invented. And I was struck by how much time she was willing to give me, because no one else would give me any time. And I've never told you, but we only had about 100 listeners. But her grace, but the fact that she was first is an example of the kind of leadership that she represents, I think, for our whole district. So I thought the first question I would ask is, this amazing thing from California's perspective happened with the Democratic transition, that you had been in the Congress for the entire time you had been in the minority. Mm-hmm. So you had become skillful in operating in a minority situation from basically 1994 till 2006. Mm-hmm. What has changed? You're now part of the inner group that's running Congress, as best I can tell. Mm-hmm. Nancy Pelosi, of course, is the leader. And the whole team now at Markey, all the people we've worked with, are now essentially in charge of policy for the United States.
Well, first, it's very exciting. But let me just say thank you to everyone. I'm really delighted to be here. Google is a constituent company. I think most of you are my constituents. And even if you're not, believe it or not, when I vote, it has an effect on you. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm really happy to be here. I'm proud of you and what you're doing, of what you're achieving. This is a place where people come to visit, to be inspired, because you're all about the future. And everyone in the country and people around the world know where this place is. So every member of Congress thinks that their district is the best. And of course they would. But the other members always say, Anna's is. Anna's is. So I'm really glad to be here. It's fun. And I know that you've had all of the big stars here, presidential candidates. I'm not running for president. I'm not interested in running for president. But I love representing you. So what changed, Eric? Well, first, on a personal note, the Speaker of the House, she's third in line in the Constitution. Imagine that we would say she. This is the first time in the history of our country that a woman, a Californian, an Italian-American, a mother, a grandmother, is Speaker of the House. This is huge in terms of history, and she belongs to us. And she's been a friend of mine since our children were very young. So, I mean, just from a personal / emotional standpoint, to see my friend become Speaker of the House of Representatives, I mean, as I just said it still, it has an effect on me. Enormously, enormously proud of her. It's worth being in the majority for many reasons. Now, my first term, and I just want to tell you this anecdotally, and I was saying this to Alan and some of the people that I met with when I first arrived here this afternoon. When I was first elected, I became part of the Congress with a new president and vice president. So it was when Bill Clinton and Al Gore had just been, they were inaugurated after I was sworn in. And the young president and the young vice president came to our congressional district, and they came here. They came to Silicon Graphics. And I think it was the third month of the presidency, either in March or April, and they came here to announce the new administration's technology policy for our nation. And here we are. I mean, look what history has been written since then. So my first term, the Democrats were in the majority. That went away real fast. And then what I think was an awful lot of darkness, I think, visited upon the country, policy-wise and otherwise. And sometimes I'm amazed that I stayed when I look over my shoulder of what all the different occurrences. There are very few members of Congress in the history of our country that have had the following two votes to cast: impeachment and war. Imagine that. I mean, when I took my oath of office in January of 1993, I never dreamed, really never dreamed, that those two issues would be on my watch. So now, after a very long, difficult struggle We won back the majority in the House and in the Senate. I'll start with the Senate and then say a few more things about the House because they'll be more positive. And that is that when we won the Senate, we won custody of the Senate. Okay. And that's the bare minimum because the Senate is not a majority body. And I don't want to get into Government 101, but that is the kind of entry-level understanding that we all have to have of the Senate. It is not a majority body. They have different rules. You have to have 60 votes in order to take up an issue, debate it, and then actually vote on it. So there's all of this run-up to including filibusters, and those are the rules of the Senate, whether the Republicans are in control or whether the Democrats are in control. But just think of it as bare minimum custody. In the House is a majority body, so it's 218 members. That's the magic number, and we have that now. What happens when you have that? I mean, I don't think any of you would check off, I want people to vote their party all the time. But imagine if the Raiders and the 49ers went into a stadium, but they weren't the Raiders and the 49ers, and you just put all of those players out on the field. It would be chaos. So parties are organizational. They organize, and it creates a team. But there's also a basic philosophy, even though a lot of people think that it's blurred on the Republican side or blurred on the Democratic side. So now we're in charge. What does that mean? We control the agenda. We control the agenda. So if there have been, example, crooked contracts that have been let by the government in different parts of the world or in the United States, the Government Reform Committee, Henry Waxman, can have a hearing on that. He can write legislation and launch it as the chairman, and he can do investigation and oversight. You set the agenda, you have subpoena power, and then you shepherd these things through the committees to the floor of the House and actually have the votes to pass them. Is it difficult? Absolutely. It always has been. There isn't anything automatic about this. But Congressional Quarterly examined votes cast and the most effective speakers in holding members together for national policy over the last 50 years. And Speaker Pelosi has been the most successful one in the last 50 years. I bet you didn't know that. And I'm not just cheerleading. I am a great cheerleader for her because I know her so well, and I have so much confidence in her. But these are contributions for the country. So a new energy policy was passed by the House. We're going to go into that. I could talk and talk. But I just want to give you a flavor of what it's like, and it's exciting. It's exciting. Unfortunately, and I just want to... And then we'll get back to your asking me questions and then hopefully employ... I got a lot to tell you. I haven't been here. So I'm excited to be here. Is that in previous Congresses, and I really haven't so much experienced this, I have to tell you. I don't think the Democrats were great at it because the longer they were in power, the more they thought that the power was theirs. There's kind of a sin that develops with a majority. When the Republicans took over, they very quickly fell into that pit. Ours was developed over 40 years of being the majority. And what I'm suggesting is that there's not enough bipartisanship, you see. And so many of the bills that we passed this last year, important ones, were bipartisan. But there are others, and the biggest one, the war, we don't have enough votes for. So it just kind of gives you a flavor. But you can tell I love being in Congress, and I'm challenged constantly by my constituents because this is the place. This is the place. It's the place of ideas. So in many ways, I have to keep up with you and what you're doing and then try to represent it well, introduce it to other members who represent different parts of the country. And but I love that, and I'm energized by it. I come home every week from Washington.
Yeah, think about the frequent flyer miles.
Oh, Eric, who wants them? Who wants those miles? I mean, the last thing, I'll give you some. I mean, I've given them to people that need to come that don't have the money to come and whatever. But traveling is hard work now. It really is. And I don't know. Maybe you need to take over United Airlines next.
That's not on the list, guys.
No, it's not on the list. Not a sexy industry, I guess.
Let's get into some of the issues. And let's start with, I think, the one that is the most controversial, which is the war. The rough situation is this war has been going on for 3 or 4 years. It's generally unpopular. There's some evidence that the surge is working, or at least temporarily. If you were president in charge of Congress and the House, and you could just decide what to do, what would you do? How would you solve this problem now?
I would begin redeploying. Just some background on this. I serve, the work we do in Congress is very specifically the committees that we're on. So I'm on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, very powerful committee. You know, if you go to Google Earth and you see Planet Earth, there's a picture of Planet Earth in the just outside the hearing room. And when I went to the committee, I said, "Why, this is a lovely picture, but why is it here?" They said, that depicts the jurisdictions of this committee. In other words, it's really powerful and all-encompassing. The other committee I serve on is the House Intelligence Committee. And so I raise that because intelligence is the tip of the spear, and it was abused and manipulated as a rationale to go to war.
By whom?
And by the administration. By the Bush people. I mean, that to me is hands down. And I think many Americans today understand that. In fact, if you ask people if they think that we had the right rationale to go to war, they say no. And I think it's a tragedy. I think it's a tragedy. Now, very pragmatically, we're there. What do we do? American people are very decent. They don't want to pull the rug out from under people. They know that the Iraqis have suffered. They understand that not only was the execution of the war bungled, but also this whole issue that the American people were not told the truth. And so they don't want to leave the Iraqis in a lurch. And in fact, we wouldn't, because that doesn't reflect who and what we are. But what's the mission of our troops now? Can anyone define what the mission of our troops is? Is it to be the best policeman in Baghdad? Is it to try and keep the warring factions apart? And then what? What is it? When we commit people to war, they give their lives. They give their lives. 2007 was the bloodiest year yet. Now, the surge has tamped down on the violence. And I think maybe sometimes Democrats don't want to acknowledge that. I don't know why. I mean, you just you acknowledge that it has tamped down some of the violence. But you know what? If I put 30 to 50,000, or we put 30 to 50,000 police officers into a major urban area, you know what would happen? It would tamp down violence and crime. So, of course, it has helped with that. But that's not the issue. The issue is the presence of America there. I think that this is my opinion, obviously. I think the invasion and the presence and the occupation there has really been a gift to the terrorists that really hate us. We have organized them in a way that I don't think they could have imagined when we began all of this. And at the beginning and in the run-up to the war, I said to colleagues, if we do this, it's going to strengthen Iran's hand. And you know what? They laughed at me. Many of them laughed. They said, what are you talking about? Where are you getting that from? And I think that it has, and I think it's destabilized that part of the world. It'll take anywhere from 10 to 12 months. That's what the military says, to redeploy. But I think that the monies that are approved by the Congress should be monies that are going to support a plan that bring our troops home safely and honorably. And that when they come home, that we give them what they need and certainly what they've earned. So you can tell how I voted. But I want to tell you something. It wasn't popular to vote against the war resolution. It really wasn't. It wasn't. I mean, I got a lot of pushback from constituents. Some said that I wasn't patriotic. I did not think that it was the right policy. I don't think preemption is befitting of our country. And I thought the policy was dangerous. I thought it would have broad and bad implications. And I said on the floor of the House, I hope I'm not right. I hope I'm not right. So this is where we are. So whoever's elected president is going to have to deal with it.
Yeah, and whichever president will have to deal with this, as you described.
Right.
Let's talk a little bit about the domestic situation. The Congress, when you were in the minority, passed a series of tax cuts to stimulate the economy. There's a lot of issues that have been raised about all of that. A lot of other things that have been going on with respect to domestic policy that you now have a chance to really affect, either by blocking or by influencing President Bush, and whoever is the ultimate president will have to deal with you all in any case. Are we going into a recession? Is Congress going to act in any meaningful way to address any of the structural imbalances that people are complaining about? What are the actions you're going to take over the next few years to try to make sure the domestic situation is a good one, jobs, good growth, et cetera?
Well, this question belongs to all of us, not just me, because the next president of the United States is going to be the ultimate, the largest determinant in terms of policy direction and the proactive presentation of policy to the Congress, and then the Congress. Congress is not, you should know this, it's not a proactive institution, and it isn't. And it goes to, all the jokes and the bad things that are said about Congress. But I thought before I got there, that it would be, and I very quickly learned that it's not. It is not proactive, it's reactive. And so the elections are going to set a huge tone and a policy determination, maybe not the specifics, because Congress is the one that writes the legislation, the Congress funds the policies, and there are always, even if it's all Democrats, they're still going to scrap about different things with one another. So this question belongs to all of us, who the next president of the United States is going to be. Well, look what they're talking about. Number one on the mind, I can tell you my constituents, I hear from 8,000 to 10,000 constituents a month. It's the highest number of contacts of any member of Congress. 8,000 to 10,000 constituents a month. Imagine that? Yeah. And you know what? I read it all. You probably don't believe me, but I do, because I need to hear where people are. And then we can talk about outreach and how we do it and what you're doing to beef up all the campaign tools. So the war is going to have to be dealt with. This will be over $1 trillion in terms of cost. First is the cost to our the precious troops, both their injuries, what their families are going through. This is long term. Long term. This is not going to go away, even if every last one of them, we bring them home. So the war is one. Domestically, people are very worried about the economy. Eric, I'm not an economist. I'm a very pragmatic person about where I think investments should be made. And then when it comes to the huge economic issues, there are others that weigh in on that. And I'm being very frank with you. But I do think that legislation is going to come up this year on a slice of our economy by which we measure our economy, and that's housing and the whole issue of the subprime market and foreclosures. There are two bills, one in the Senate, one in the House. I think, God bless you, in the first half of this year that will reconcile those bills and send legislation to the president. Now, all of this has there's a delayed reaction before it actually has an effect, but it's something important for us to do. I think what we constantly have to, I do anyway, this is where I come from, is that we make the investments now that are going to serve us long-term for our country. There's plenty of short-term stuff around. There are the fiscal quarters for companies. We have to deal what we have to deal with day in and day out. And so there's plenty of short-term stuff that we can talk about and we know we have to do. I like the long-term stuff. That's why I helped develop what we call our innovation agenda. And so the 2009 budget, we're going to be looking at funding, and certainly the Office of Science, because that's not something the private sector does. It's really a national role in the federal government that funds this. So, children's health care, we still have to go back. I mean, why a president of the United States would ever veto legislation that ensures children in the country? Imagine that. You want me to tell you a story about that? When I was at the White House not all that long ago, and it was a nice occasion because the president was signing my bill on a moratorium. It's the longest moratorium we've gotten. I wanted permanent, but it's a moratorium on internet access taxes.
Can we stop and congratulate this? This is amazing.
Anyway.
Something that we worked on in the late 90s that you managed to get through.
Right. Yeah,
and
we started then. We started then, so it's great. See how it takes time? But he signed it into law the day that the moratorium was expiring. So typical of Congress, we got just in under the wire. But at any rate, I went over to the White House, was invited to go there for the bill signing, which is very nice, obviously. You can't, there's nothing that you ever take for granted when you look up at the Capitol and if you're at the White House. It's always moving. Regardless of who's there, you're still, you're overwhelmed by it. I mean, we're citizens of this country, and what that represents is extraordinary. So anyway, we go in, they say the president is in his office, so we go into the Oval Office, and it's nice, and he couldn't have been nicer. I mean, he's happy as a clam, and so it's toward the end of the day, and I went over to his credenza to look. I love to look at pictures, even if I don't know who's in them. I did know who was in the family pictures because his grandfather, I was born and raised in Connecticut, his grandfather was our U.S. Senator from Connecticut. So all of a sudden, who's standing there but himself? And he said, do you know who's in these, do you know who that is? Do you know that? I said, I do. I said, that's your grandfather, Prescott Bush, your grandmother, your mother, your father. And they were holding the president, today's president, George W. Bush, as a baby. And he had cute little cowboy boots on. And he said, look, who's that? Who's that? And I said, just precious. I said, you're so precious. And he said, precious. I said, then, not now. not now. So we had some fun together. And I didn't know, I really didn't know he wanted to talk. And I thought, what am I going to say to him, And meanwhile, these other members want FaceTime with him. I was happy looking at the pictures. So at any rate, I asked him what he had done that day. I said, tell me what you did today. He said, I'll tell you. So he whips out his schedule out of his pocket, and he starts going through it. And he said, and then I went to such and such an organization to speak to them about S-CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program. I said, Mr. President, this is so wrong what you're doing. This isn't right. This just isn't right. He said, I know you don't agree with me, Anna. I said, Mr. President, you have a prayer framed over there on that dresser. And I said, what you're doing doesn't match that prayer. And then he went on to the rest of what he did, that day. So I think that's an interesting story, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
When we talk about, I'm glad you mentioned the internet tax because you have been pushing much of the fundamental legislation that has enabled the technology industry. You have worked with us on broadband. You have worked with us on internet taxes. You've worked with us on H-1 visas. Since you're part of the core team, give us a sense of, over the next year or two, what are the next battles that will favor technology and technology industries and the internet as a whole?
It's a great
what are you
question.
working on for the internet?
I hope what you all hear is not, it is a compliment, and I appreciate it. But my philosophy in all of this is, I don't know all of the innards of what you do. I mean, when I read about cloud computing, I thought, this brings a new meaning to head in the clouds, I mean, it's fascinating to me. And at the same time, it makes sense because I think there's such a duplication of, or a redundancy of equipment. And so you're putting it someplace else. It's better for the user. It's open. There's more accessibility. It could be cheaper. I like that.
Have you ever heard a member of Congress actually describe our strategy? That's incredible. That's wonderful.
So, and I'm a Democratic with a small d. I don't think anyone should stand in the way of what a consumer wishes to consume, how they wish to use something, and so that's the way I operate. Net neutrality. Net neutrality is so important. I think we named this thing the wrong way. I don't know who ever came up with this term, and I said it to Alan many times, because it's like, what the hell is net neutrality? We should have had something better. I don't know who coined it. But at any rate, we're going back at that this year. And the legislation is going to be broader, and so that we can get broader support. I think if we have a Democratic president, maybe even, I don't want to think that myself, that it's going to be Republican, but I think that an enlightened president is going to know that this is for the future of our country. There are huge interests against this, and you know what? It's always about money. It's always about money. I mean, there's no quarrel in this. But there are some that don't get the open access and what this will contribute in terms of broadband for our country. Imagine we don't have a broadband policy for this great nation. Can you believe that? It's unbelievable to me. So we have work to do, and I hope that we will be even more successful on net neutrality in 2008. There is a bill. I'm an original co-sponsor of it with Ed Markey. You should have Ed Markey. Has Ed Markey come here? Yeah.
Yes.
Isn't he fabulous? Did you hear him? With that Boston accent? He's a character. He really is. He's very, very smart and able, though. So we'll work on that. Patent reform is very important.
Huge issue for us.
That's kind of the blueprint of how people can operate in the country. Big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies don't like what we've done. But you know what? There's always someone that doesn't like what you do. And we passed a very good bill in the House. It's come out of a Senate committee. And I think we could get a patent reform bill. I think the president will sign it.
Good.
And that's a good sign because it is such a complicated area. Congressman Zoe Lofgren is a real leader in that, and she deserves a great deal of credit on that.
And in fact, she's coming over to see us in a bit.
That's great. So let's see, what else? Net neutrality. All the privacy issues are large. And it's, as a member of the House Intelligence Committee, I know I've done battle there to not only protect our national security, but that we honor our Constitution. The issue of privacy wasn't born with the .com generation. But I think more than any other generation, you really get it because there's an application across the board, not only in with the government, but how government weighs in with companies. I mean, they want to take your information. They want to know how long you keep it. They want to know what you do with it. Well, what are they going to do with it? What are they going to do with it? And there have been, I think, many violations along the way. I can't tell you everything that goes on at the Intelligence Committee, but I can tell you that I wasn't for granting immunity to the telecommunications companies. I don't know what they... How do we know? How do we know? How do we even know what they gave them? And you know what? There is a structure, a legal structure that the government could have gone through in order to have created a legal zone for the telecommunications companies to give information at a very, very tough time in a moment in the history of our country. But, grant immunity to whom, for what, that we don't know? and make it permanent, I mean, I think that's a pretty bad precedent. So I think I'm wandering off the range here, but you can tell.
Well, every one of these is right on our agenda.
These are really big things.
I have one final question, but let's see if people, I'm sure people have comments or questions, so we'll ask people to line up, and I'll ask you my final question, which is, let's just talk politics here.
Okay. Good.
We've got the.
I love it.
And you're the expert.
I don't know about that.
We've got a primary on February 5th. Google, of course, is encouraging everyone to vote, Republican or Democrat, whichever candidate you like. We've got Super Tuesday. We've got these elections before. Looks to me like it's a food fight on both the Republican and the Democratic side. And what do you think is going to happen? Who are you supporting? Tell us, give us your read.
I knew I wouldn't come out of here without someone asking me all of this, but I'm excited because a year from now we'll have a new president, number one. So I think the country wants a great president and a good president. The American people, I think, have an inner exhaustion and a pent-up frustration because people, especially young people, have an unobstructed view of where we need to go and where we need to land and the best ideas about how to get there. So that's what this year is about. That really is what this year is about. So what do I think? I think I don't know, given the outcome of Iowa and the outcome of New Hampshire. What both of those, a caucus and a primary, I think tell us is that this is going to be a big battle. Okay. It's heavily contested, and it is on both sides. And for the first time, I think on the Republican side since 1950, this is wide open. See, there isn't any heir apparent, unless people think that Hillary Clinton is, wears that mantle. But I think it's a little different category. So it's mixed up, and I think it's very healthy. I do think it's very healthy. And I think that whomever the two nominees are, they will have really worked hard for it. They will have really worked hard for it.
Do you think we'll know on February 5th?
No, I don't think.
You don't?
No, but I mean, what do I know? I'm just guessing. And I say I'm not sure about it because in the top tier of Democrats, and I think that John Edwards is in there, but I don't think he's bringing to the table what Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are. I think we can probably all stipulate to that. I don't know. And I'm not saying it against him. It's just an observation. They are both very well funded, and they're both they're heavy contenders. They're heavyweights. And so unless there's some kind of breakout trend in South Carolina, Michigan and that, but right now I don't see it. I think that there's a real push and pull, and let me just say this to you. I thought of this some time ago. Just imagine this. If Hillary Clinton hadn't been as anxious to run for the Senate and go to New York and become, offered herself as a candidate for the United States Senate in New York when Senator Moynihan was retiring, and had gotten into the next cycle and gone back to her home state of Illinois, there would not have been a Barack Obama. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, isn't that? I'm fascinated by having thought of that. So I don't know. I think it's mixed up. I think it's great. I haven't come out for the candidates that are in the race now. Boy, do I pick them. But he's my friend, so they're all my friends. But he's been a longtime friend, Chris Dodd. And there was a wonderful piece on Joe Biden and Chris Dodd. I don't know whether it was in the Post or the New York Times or whatever it was, but paid tribute to their knowledge and their experience. So I don't know whether I'm going to endorse anyone, but I'm going to vote in the primary, and I'm not going to tell you for who yet.
Our first question.
Yeah, you mentioned exhaustion. I call it outrage fatigue.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it's been 7 years.
Yeah.
And,
tough. Mm-hmm.
When you said we're going to have a next president a year from now, I'm not even sure of that. I really don't put it beyond this guy to like declare martial law. Okay.
You would not be a President Bush supporter.
No. Yes. Very perceptive. That's why you get the big bucks. Anyway.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that, Eric? Yes.
I mean, we could be at war with Iran tonight, for all we know, for some, Gulf of Tonkin type thing. And I know you get requests daily to impeach these guys. And what do you say beyond, well, we don't have a supermajority in the Senate? I mean, we're in big trouble. And 8 years ago, a blowjob was impeachable, but now displacing millions of Iraqis, killing hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, how high does the bar have to be?
I think the call for impeachment is born out of all the things that you described, and I recognize that. And not for one moment do I differentiate between us in terms of all those emotions, where you're angry, where you're frustrated, where you're disgusted, where you think, I can't believe that these things are happening. So I have not carried any brief for this administration. But I think some people think that I do or have because I'm not for impeachment. And let me tell you why. I've been through it. I've seen what it's done to the country. I saw what it did to my constituents. It pitted people against one another. It tore at a very essential part of the fabric of our country. And I know all the counter-arguments. What he did was what Clinton did, and I don't know what not. I'm just telling you where I'm coming from, not to debate it. You asked me, and I'm telling you. It's a blunt instrument. It's a blunt instrument. And everything comes to a screeching halt in the Congress when impeachment is taken up. Just go back. I mean, do a Google search on it. So I've come down on the side that, I want to get things done in the Congress. We have a newfound majority. I think I have an obligation to optimize that for my constituents. This guy is going to be gone, and it would take longer to launch impeachment proceedings. And at the end of that process and what the country goes through, the votes are not there to impeach him. So that's where I am. And I know that there are a lot of people that disagree with me. I know that, and I respect it. It would be easier for me to say I'm for it and not have people, hit me upside the head. But that's where I am.
And then Dick Cheney's president anyway. So.
That's right, yeah.
So you would not be a Dick Cheney fan either.
Yeah.
I was just making an observation, Eric.
There's the joke. Do you know what would happen if President Bush were impeached? And the answer is that Dick Cheney would be president. So yeah. But it's a heavy thing, and so that's where I am. What's your question,
Congresswoman? I want to thank you very much for being here today.
I'm delighted.
I'm not going to talk about who I'm in favor for the president or the nomination, and I think there are legitimate criticisms of Hillary Clinton, but I've been absolutely appalled at the undercurrent of sexism in almost everything I've read. They write about her wrinkles and call her an tired, aging woman. When they write about Fred Thompson's wrinkles, he's a grizzled, leathery cowboy. And I wanted to, and whenever you say that, you're just playing the victim card. I wanted to know your opinion of that, both in the presidential run right now and also how sexism has affected your own career.
It's a wonderful question, and I'm pleased that it's coming from a man. No,
There's a few.
Let's see how I can answer you. Our country has made progress in some areas in fits and starts about make the decision of who really kind of cuts the mustard in order to do the job. And for a very long time, women were very successful at running for school boards. Why? Because they were active in the PTA. they raise children, they nurture children, and so the public saw that as a natural. They'll be all right there, and what can they break? I mean, they know something about it. So it's taken many years for the public's confidence to grow, and that women be judged by the same yardstick as anyone else. Now, is it easy? No. I have to tell you that I still believe that, and I know, I experience it every day in Congress, with the majority male body, that I have to work harder and that I'm measured in a different way. But I decided a long time ago, that's all right. You set the highest standard, and you know what? I'll go past it. I'll go past it. You see? So I can't spend time by the side of the road saying, oh, my God, did you hear what so-and-so said? Although I love to tell my pals the stories because they're, they are what they are. I have an obligation to represent people and get things done. Now you see the country trying to adjust to. I think there's been a great deal of maturity on the part of the country in terms of Hillary Clinton's candidacy. But I have said to close friends, buddies, and I'll say it here, you're my constituents and my friends, that I have debated with myself about whether the country is more racist or sexist. And so there will be manifestations of that. Mm-hmm. We are not rid of this yet. We're growing, and I think that Barack Obama's candidacy is nothing short of extraordinary. Because, I mean, it gives me goosebumps when I say it, because there are people around the world that see in him, when they look at him, they see themselves, you see? And women fought back very, very hard in New Hampshire and really created the win, the 2% win. But she needed the win to stay in the, it would have been the biggest body blow if she had lost New Hampshire. So we're still growing. We're not out of these things yet. And so in the history of our country, in our day, in our time, in 2008, we're going to have more growth, you see. But meanwhile, they're going to talk about wrinkles. I don't think any of you will say that about me. But, it's the way it is. It is. It still is for so many people. I experience it every day, but,
That's an extraordinary answer. And if you think about the Bay Area, majority
That's
women
right.
in
Yes,
Congress,
yes.
2 senators.
And the California Democratic delegation is, for the first time in the history of our nation, a majority of women. Isn't that something? Nice to see you. What's your name?
Michael. I recently came across two interesting concepts by somebody, John Dean, who is chief counsel to Richard Nixon. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering if you could comment on, it's hard for me to even know how to validate them, so I was wondering if you could comment on them based on your experiences. He has one, the concept of a unitary executive branch, where there has been a concerted push by neocons, basically from Reagan till present, to concentrate power in the presidency and kind of work in secret. There's a lot more secrecy because these people have something that basically 75% of the Americans would disagree with if they actually knew what these guys were up to. And that goes along with that is this notion of an authoritarian follower personality type, which tends to be, this person claims, or the research that he cites claims, a personality type where you tend to be basically a conservative neocon, and you take a position that's a set of axioms and you don't think too hard about it. It's more an ideology versus being data-driven, and you're very Machiavellian in your pursuit of your goals, and you just do anything that you can to get to your goal. Mm-hmm. And one manifestation of this is maybe we see fewer whistleblowers now in the Bush administration than we used to see in the 70s and so forth. Is there any validity here? I mean, what are your observations on this?
Well, you've asked a lot of big questions. First, many of you don't even remember John Dean, but I was a young mother watching the Watergate hearings, and so I remember him testifying. And so now you may be familiar with him because he does commentary on on some of the networks and cable stations, and he's written a book. What is fascinating to me about what John Dean says now, looking through the, looking over his shoulder and having experienced the history of the Nixon administration and what his commentary is now about the Bush administration, many of us thought or were shaped or seared by the experience of Watergate because it was a signal. It was, I don't even know what the adjective is to describe it, where a president really was challenging the Constitution, you see, and there was a huge struggle. But, and I'd never experienced that in my lifetime, and other people hadn't, and that's why it remains with us, and so does John Dean. It's fascinating to me that his analysis of this administration is, and we thought Nixon was secretive. I mean, he wanted to give up the tapes, right? That this is the most secretive administration in the history of the country. And then the damage that occurs with that kind of secrecy, because we're an open society. It's the greatest blessing that we have. It's also our vulnerability, given what we face in terms of global terrorism. The other part of it that you raise is the power of the presidency. And there is no question, and historians, I think, have documented this and documented it well, that the Nixon administration, not only by Nixon himself, but those that were in key positions, Dick Cheney being one of them, and he was really shaped by what they were about and the mark that they wanted to leave, and that was, in many ways, what we call today or refer to the imperial presidency. And many of those same players have come back that were part of that administration have come back into this one. Now, I would just caution you, though, there isn't any person that's become president of the United States that has said, you know what, I think we should shrink the powers of the presidency. So it's going to be fascinating to me as a citizen and a member of Congress to see what the new president will do. And that's where the Congress is so important. That's where the Congress is so important, that we retain the balance that the framers not only dreamed of, but set down, and what we've operated by, that there be, equal branches of government. But I would not automatically make an assumption that with a new president, even with a Democratic president, I don't think the secrecy will be the same. But in this area, I don't know. We're going to see. So, I hope I've touched on what you asked about.
I mean, this may be cheating, and feel free to discard this question.
No,
but
Eric is going to do that.
But you mentioned the importance of Congress, which I wanted to key in on. And I mean, checks and balances, for me, regardless of your ideology, you have to support the notion of checks and balances, especially when we see what happened over the last 8 years. What happened with Congress and the war with Iraq? I mean, where were the checks and balances there? How did they pull that off?
Didn't question enough. There was timidity. The winds were blowing very, very hard. And the administration put out the information. I mean, it's... If I just came up to you right now and I said, this is a threat, an imminent threat to the United States of America, and this is what you need to do, would you start asking a lot of questions? Would you feel, oh my God, this is what I'm being told, and it's our country, it's our democracy, the Republican, whatever. 60% of the House Democrats voted against the war resolution. But what I would recommend to you is, it's a fascinating examination. The documentary that Bill Moyers did of the examination of the media and the press in the run-up to the war. I felt like someone had just punched me in the gut, because it reminded me, when I tried to go to sleep, I thought, why are you so upset? You already kind of know this. But it was that I was reliving every single day in the run-up. and it's extraordinarily powerful. Then you make up you can tell where I am. I can just tell you where I am and why I am where I am.
So we're in the process of running out of time. So I want to make sure we get our questioners. So if we get a quick question, go ahead.
Quick question. Question about foreign policy and intelligence. The country that most concerns me in the Middle East isn't Iran, but Pakistan. My belief is that Pakistan is an army with a country, and there's some evidence that suggests that its army has been compromised with al-Qaeda sympathizers. So as a member of the intelligence community, how do you deal with Pakistan? Do you trust them as an ally? Are they credible? Do we have to have a different approach?
It's a great question. And I would take it up to the ultimate notch. They have nuclear weapons. And that's an elite club in the world. You're in an elite club if you have nuclear weapons. So this is more than menacing. We get briefings at the Intelligence Committee on Pakistan, and we'll have more when I go back because it's ever changing. We are partners with someone that is at once described as embracing democracy, but playing footsie with the other side. This is Musharraf, in order to stay in power. So we don't have the best of all worlds because neither one is either correct or attractive. So in my view, this is where some hardcore pragmatism has to be applied because we can't just operate with theories. It's very important for our national security and our national security interests that Pakistan and its nuclear weapons not fall into the hands of those that really want to do us the greatest harm. So there were calls on the part of some members of Congress that we withdraw all funding, that we do. I'm not for that. And these are not attractive things because as I describe who's there and how he's conducted himself, I mean, to take down, to challenge the Supreme Court, to arrest all the legal scholars and lawyers. Some people like that, get rid of the lawyers. But at the end of the day, we want a great lawyer, the best lawyer on one side of us, best doctor on the other. So I think that we have to be very pragmatic in this. But we also, you see, this is what happens when you have a blurred message as a country, that how critical democracy is. And I know many scholars because I've attended conferences with them, whatever, and we're online constantly about what's going on there. As the Brits would say, this is a sticky wicket. So those are some of my thoughts.
Our next question, quickly.
I don't think there's a silver bullet in this. Yeah. There's not just one answer.
You mentioned a need for more bipartisanship. It's been said that given the challenges of the next president, it might be as hard a job since FDR's first term in the Depression. Kyoto expires, Bush's tax cuts expire, the first of the baby boomers retire, forcing enormous pressure for change in healthcare and Social Security, never mind Iraq and all the rest of it. True bipartisanship or post-partisanship, as Mr. Obama would like to say, is always desired, but so hard. Outside of a world war, it almost seems like you don't really get it. What elements of that have you seen in your career, and what scenario can you even envision for a recipe of that truly coming together in this next term?
Yeah, it's a very important question. In any relationship, you have to have a willingness on both sides. Whether you're married, whether you have a partner, however, you know that in relationships. You put a huge multiplier on that in terms of how we function there. I saw how President Clinton, and I mean, this was my experience, how every time there was a meeting on an issue at the White House or when the White House congressional people would come to the Hill, they always included Republicans. They always included Republicans, a very important model, all right? Because of, I think, when it's all one party, it can be conducted well and admirably, or one side can say to the other, you know what, just give you the freeway salute in plain English. We have the votes. We don't need you. We don't have to talk to you. We don't have to operate with you. And that's what's happened, and it's very unhealthy. Don't underestimate for a moment what the country says and what they give to the next person that's president, how they have run, the issues that they carry, and that the stronger their hand, the better that hand is to deal with the Congress, you see? And, from the beginning, I remember Dick Armey saying to me, "You're president." Imagine someone saying, "You're president." I mean, no matter how much I love being a Democrat, I've never thought that the president is just my president. I mean, it's somebody else's. It's our president. But I remember Dick Armey saying to me, "Your president didn't even get 50% of the vote. And we're going to make sure that he gets even less." So you see, from the get-go, it was like this. So the next president and the built-in fervor of the American people on these issues will give the president a strong hand to deal with them and help solve them. We can do these things, you know. They're not just because they're unaddressed doesn't mean that we can't or we don't know how. It's the willingness. Yeah.
What I'd like to do is I want to make sure we hear our two last questioners. Maybe
I
could
talk
ask
too much.
No, people want to hear you.
Talk too long.
Maybe we could ask you, each of you, to ask your question, and then you can give a combined answer and do our best. So state your question?
I'm on a slightly different topic. Do you do your own taxes?
Do I do my own taxes?
Do you do your own? Do you use a tax program?
I wouldn't dream of doing my own taxes.
Why not?
It terrifies me.
Is the tax code too complicated for you? Or?
No, because I don't have a complicated portfolio. I never have. I mean, I'm not, I just don't have a complicated portfolio.
Was that your question, or were you leading to something?
But let me tell you why. Not why I have an uncomplicated portfolio, but why I have.
But maybe we want to find out why he wanted to ask this question.
Well, I'm curious why the tax
code
is so
redone.
insane.
Sure, I mean it's. First of all, I wouldn't know how to navigate it, and B, I don't want to spend my time doing that because I have other things I have to do. But C, holding public office, if there is one blip and you see that on the front pages of the newspaper, you're going to run me out of town on a rail. So I have to tell you, that scares me. But the bigger story is that about its complexity. And I don't know. You know what? I think it's become kind of a campaign slogan where candidates say, we're going to uncomplicate this and we're going to rewrite it and who can figure it out. I think there are other things that will be done before that is, to tell you the truth. Now, do I think there are going to be changes to the tax code itself? Yeah, I do. Starting with the gigantic tax cut that has, I don't think it was the right way to go policy-wise. So at least I touched on. I think I got to what you were suggesting.
You have the honor of the last question.
I'm wondering about a House resolution you voted in favor of back in, I think, May of 2007, which would amend the Sherman Antitrust Act to make illegal foreign oil and petroleum exporters, specifically OPEC. And I was wondering what the justification for that was, and if you think
we
actually...
You have to. I don't even remember the vote. I have to tell you.
Okay.
Don't hold that against me. I need your name, your email address, and I'll go back and look at it. I don't remember it to give you a sane answer. All right. Okay. Right now. So I'm not going to make something.
What I want to do is we ran over, but I think Anna's support message is just so fascinating. I appreciate you guys running over. Thank you for staying so much longer.
Thank you, Eric, for your hospitality. Thank you, everybody.